When it comes to bullet hell, no other console carried as many heavyweights as the Xbox 360. It was the system of choice in Japan for most of Cave's masterpieces. And when it comes to the absolute most ridiculously hard shmups ever concocted, Cave is the big dog, the king of the castle, the boss hog. So boy do we have one hell of an episode in store for you. And by we, I don't just mean myself, but also Mark MSX from the Electric Underground. He's won all cleared, at the least, most of the games on this list, like Futari in Maniac mode, Ketsui, DOJ White Label, Rank 3 clear on Death Smiles, but most impressive of all, a 2-all on the original Dodonpachi, most of which you can see on his channel. Needless to say, his STG skills are elite. And this is our very first collaboration together in a series we're calling Direct Inject. If there was ever an episode to do together, this is it. So if you had any idea of what's in store, you'd already be wetting yourself in anticipation. So put down a pee pad and grab a jar of butt paste, because it's time for the top 5 most brutal shmups on the Xbox 360. And for the first game, I'm going to start with the last game, as in the last game the Cave ever created, their last hurrah, Dodonpachi SaiDaiOujou, which roughly translates to a most blissful death. But I can tell you that there's nothing blissful about getting your ass kicked by this one. Forget expert mode, just getting through it on normal is a task too far. SDOJ was purposefully meant to be one of the hardest games Cave had ever released. What makes it so tough? The chief reason in my mind is the incredibly fast bullet speed. And unlike many other Cave games that induce slowdown to help you maneuver through them, SDOJ gives no such quarter. The bullet patterns are just as dense, and most of the time, you need to dodge them without any slowdown at all. Another point that makes SDOJ so brutal is that, again, unlike many other Cave games, there's also very few ways to cancel the bullets. Aside from dropping a bomb, simply unleashing your hyper attack will do no such thing. So while you may be firing a screen-clearing beam of destruction, you can still get nailed. So you have to continue dodging the incoming fire and hope the big bad dies before you do. It's also pretty damn hard right from the get-go. Even the first stage will catch first-time players completely off guard with the bullet speed, and it'll kill you if you're not paying attention. I'm able to do pretty well through the first 3 levels, but starting on stage 4, the bosses especially become above my pay grade. I'm usually best at stages themselves, as they allow you to reflex dodge, which is where I normally function, as I haven't played the game enough to master the patterns. But on the bosses, forget it. With the speed these bullets fly and without spamming the bomb and eventually credits, it's completely impossible to worm your way through without getting nailed. You really need to learn every single boss pattern to make any headway, and I definitely haven't put in enough time or earned the right to progress. To Cave's credit, they did a fabulous job of getting you all sorts of training modes to practice on the Xbox 360. You can train any level and also start at the mid-boss or the stage boss to practice as much as you need. In fact, this release on the Xbox 360 is packed with extra modes. There's the arcade version in HD, which you've been watching me play, as well as a version 1.5, which changes and fixes a number of things from the arcade original. It's a bit beyond my scope of knowledge, but something that Mark will touch on shortly. There's even a novice mode for beginners. The mode that I really wanted to mention is the X360 exclusive mode, which I like to call the story mode. And it's excellent for beginners and casual players. But it's not simply an easier mode with some new mechanics, but a completely redone and expanded UI that's visually gorgeous and a joy to look at, as if the game wasn't incredible enough to look at already. It really does feel like a story mode, where the characters banter back and forth during gameplay, and the more casual pace lets you take in the sights of the game. In fact, I wish there was a way to turn off that banter, since I'd rather just hear more of the cool music and sound effects than listen to them talk and talk and talk. And although I don't speak Japanese, I already have an idea of what they're probably saying. In all seriousness though, I bring this up as it's actually a really fun mode for anyone getting their feet wet with bullet hell shmups. You have this unbelievably difficult game that's beyond most players, including myself, on its standard setting, and yet Cave went overboard in creating a graphically unique, story-oriented mode that makes the game accessible to every range of players. And I love that. So if you want to enjoy this gorgeous looking game and aren't an aficionado, this Xbox 360 version is the one for you. Once this mode starts to feel easy, you can try your hand again at the normal arcade mode. Just try not to think about what the anime girls are snickering and saying about you in Japanese. I kind of find myself in between on this game, with the story mode being much easier than I'd like, and a normal mode that's just brutalizing. At least not without me putting in an amount of time I just don't have the wherewithal for. So it's hard to imagine that a yet even more insanely difficult mode still exists. But oh, it does. And that mode is what earned this game a spot in the top 5 most brutal list. Since I doubt you want to watch me die over and over within the first minute of a stage, let's turn this over to Mark so he can show us how it's done and talk about what makes this mode and this game so cool and yet so brutal in his mind.
The most important thing to understand about SDOJ is that the more undressed your waifu becomes, the more difficult your life is going to be. I find this very interesting. Rather than just being a shmup, perhaps SDOJ is actually a deep meta-commentary on the nature of society and internet culture. Nier Automata doesn't sound so original now, does it? Seriously though, please be aware that selecting the bikini waifu actually does activate expert mode of the game, even in novice mode. This was a small detail that I did not understand for years, and resulted in me constantly playing in expert mode without realizing it. I suppose at some point I could have chosen a waifu in her evening gown or whatever, but where's the fun in that? You gotta hand it to them. Cave knows how to get them credits. It gives a fistful of quarters a whole new meaning, doesn't it? Like Junkie mentioned, SDOJ is absolutely oppressive in terms of bullet speed and density. One thing that really surprises me about the game, given the deep Danmaku design, is just how fat and chunky your hitbox is. Maybe it's just me, but it almost feels like SDOJ could benefit from some laps in the pool, though maybe that's just my personal taste. Since I first joined the shmup community, there has been a long-standing debate about whether SDOJ or DFK is the better game. I'm not going to get into that here, but I will say that I do prefer SDOJ more, even if it is kind of crazy and broken. Scoring in SDOJ is absolutely nothing like scoring in the previous games, except for, well, maybe Dodonpachi, thanks to Glitcho, because rather than having to engage in the usual scoring systems like chaining, maximum bonus, hyper management, etc. The way you get big scores in SDOJ is by abusing the overflow glitch. The technical breakdown of how the overflow glitch works is like this. And then you hyper the right conditions in stages 3 and 5, right? As far as the question about what is different with version 1.5 of SDOJ, the key difference is that version 1.5 removes the overflow glitch. The lesson we can all learn here is that when you hear people rambling and complaining about how games today are stupid and how retro games didn't need a bunch of crappy patches, you can always point to games like SDOJ where, in order to remove a significant scoring bug, Cave had to create and release an entirely new version of the game. With that being said though, the overflow glitch is pretty damn hype and fun to watch. Because I'm contractually obligated, I do need to mention the input lag problem with SDOJ on the 360, which adds to the difficulty in the worst way. Generally, most Cave ports on the 360 have solid enough input lag results, with the Futari port being actually 2 frames with VSync off, but sadly SDOJ is a huge mess performance-wise. This has been long discussed and criticized even before the Electric Underground in my obsession with input lag. What makes the SDOJ input lag especially frustrating is how it fluctuates along with the game's slowdown, which is completely ridiculous. Recently though, I did find one small way to improve the input lag situation. If you switch your 360 over to 480i, you will actually run SDOJ more smoothly than 720p or 1080p and cause less input lag. It's crazy, but I have a video proving it. So either break out your CRT or invest in an OSSC if you want improved performance. Also, this game has Dodonpachi, which is probably the most insane TLB Cave has ever created, and its final gift to the Shmup playing world.
Next up is my personal all-time favorite Cave game, and that's Mushihimesama Futari, 'cause dragons. Futari includes what's widely considered the most difficult one-all in the history of Shmups, Ultra Mode. Why is Futari my favorite Cave game? Because it has everything that I look for in a good shmup. Big set pieces with awesome presentation, gorgeous graphics, my favorite music of any bullet hell, and tons of variety in the levels that are long enough but don't overstay their welcome. It also doesn't hurt that I'm an absolute sucker for fantasy themes, so this game is right up my alley. A reason I recommend this package to anyone is that it was developed by none other than M2, so it has an amazing array of modes and options that make it accessible to anyone. If you think these games are just too hard for you, I can guarantee that you'll find a mode and a setting that allows you to enjoy everything the game has to offer and slowly improve your skills. The original mode has a good bullet speed, and the give and take between slowing things down with your laser and letting go to clear past thick waves of fire gives Futari a rhythm that I really enjoy. While I've never played the often maligned original game, to me, 1.5 strikes a perfect balance between difficulty and fun. The first couple stages are not tough at all, and most experienced players will breeze right through them, almost as if to give you a false sense of confidence, because then, stage 3 arrives to humble your sorry ass and teach you the ways of practice. You won't be going much farther without having a handle on the pacing of the game and how to clear large volleys of shots in quick bursts while taking your finger off the trigger. And here's where the wealth of excellent features by M2 comes into play and why I love it so much. It caters to pros and novices alike with an excellent training mode that lets you practice any level, any boss from the start. You can also select things like your starting weapon power, bombs, credits, play mode, and a host of other things. You can train to your level and slowly improve. and I highly recommend you do, as Stage 3 is also where the game gets really exciting. Once you get the rhythm of using your main laser and standard shot, moving through the levels becomes like an on-again, off-again dance. Each character has two modes, standard and abnormal, and while I can't even begin to cover every aspect of a game this deep, suffice to say each has their own pros and cons, along with a unique playstyle, my favorite being Palm in abnormal mode, as I typically prefer offensive-minded choices. His laser is ultra powerful for taking out bosses quicker, as dense pattern dodging is my weakest point, and he's just a ton of fun to play with. There is, however, one thing that I can't stand about him, and I think I may be the only one. His voice annoys the hell out of me, especially when he dies. Now, I have no idea what he's actually saying in Japanese, but all I can hear is this little bitch scream yelling, "Tinkle Deck!" Hearing that over and over while practicing a harder mode, "Tinkle Deck!" Everyone, put down your glasses, I wanna tinkle deck! Oh my god, I wanna just reach in there and strangle the little bastard. Just shut up, will you? An option to turn that voice off would have been oh so welcome. But I digress. Back to this badass game. Stage 4 is not a ton harder than 3, so once you get comfortable, you can enjoy another kick-ass stage with great enemy designs and beautiful pixel art. And some great music, I might add. But Stage 5 is where things really go, at least for me, from like to love. The brakes come off and the bullet speed increases farther, turning it into a frantic gauntlet of fire and brimstone. To be honest, sometimes I'm not sure how I manage to squeeze through some of this oncoming fire and could swear I got nailed. But thanks to the small enough hitbox, mastering this stage will make you feel like an absolute badass. And make no mistake, on original mode, it's no cakewalk. Another thing about this stage is the music. It's absolutely brilliant and one of my favorite tracks from any shmup that I've ever played. Just take a moment to watch this level with that killer OST and tell me this isn't what kicking some ass in a shmup is all about. Now for anyone looking at this and thinking, good lord, you're nuts, I can't play something like this. Well, this is the top 5 hardest shmups on the Xbox video after all. But fear not, the arrange mode has you covered. In this mode, you play as both characters simultaneously, with a very cool switching mechanic. As you rack up points, Rekko and Palm will defend each other with shields that either slow down bullets near you or reflect them back on the enemy. Further still, you can take hits, and instead of death, it will pull from your pool of points and launch a counter bomb instead. This mode is absolutely much easier than original, but the back and forth mechanic makes it a lot of fun. If you manage to rack up 9,999 points for both, you can unleash a fever mode super attack that basically turns you into the Macross SDF rail cannon for the duration, annihilating everything in your path. So if you want to just play the game at a novice level and enjoy what it has to offer, the Xbox 360 port has you covered. But since we're talking about the hardest games on the Xbox 360, I can't let this go without showing you the Maniac and Ultra modes, considered one of the hardest, if not the hardest gaming experiences in any shmup ever. It's way, way beyond anything I ever have the time, practice, or wherewithal to play. So how could I possibly show you? I won't. The incredibly talented Mark from Electric Underground will be the one to show you how it's done, and do what I cannot, along with explaining what it takes to even begin to play these modes, and how the scoring works. Take it away, Mark.
For those who have never experienced it, Futari Ultra Mode is what happens when Cave spends all their money on cigarettes and lewd Rico drawings. When creating Ultra Mode, the internal design document simply said, "We need these quarters right now." Earlier, Junkie mentioned that in original mode, Futari lulls you into a false sense of security. It builds up your confidence a little bit before you get steamrolled in Stage 4. This is definitely not the case in Ultra Mode, where you can die 3 times before even beating the first mid-boss. I mean, that never happened to me personally, but happened to my friend, and he felt pretty bad about it. I gave him some advice though. I said, "Listen, you're going about this the wrong way. The problem is that you're playing Abnormal Palm. Abnormal Palm can kill enemies. That's too easy. What you need to do is you need to switch to Normal Palm, who is painfully underpowered and needs to bomb to get through Stage 2. This is the key to learning. In fact, in the 14 years since Futari's release, only one masochistic Japanese player named Rescue has ever beaten Ultra Mode with Normal Palm. That's what we call good game design." In Junkie's segment of the video, he requested that I describe scoring system for all you noobs out there. Not a problem. Futari's scoring system is very simple. Here are the basic steps for achieving a world record score in Futari Ultra Mode 1.5. So the first step is to pick the weird dragon. And then you fly on the dragon, and you press the shoot button. That's what makes the bullets. The bullets kill the bugs. The bugs bleed rocks. You get the rocks are good. The rocks change colors. You match the colors. That's what makes the math. The math goes up, the math gets high. To stay high, don't get hit. The longer you don't get hit, the more the bugs will bleed. You beat the first stage. You keep the colors. You beat the next stage. The math keeps going up. You keep shooting. You keep killing. You're doing really well. Believe in yourself. That's important. Then when you get to the last stage, the math gets really, really high. The math gets so high the game says, that's too many numbers, and gives up. But you keep playing. You beat the stage. You beat the boss. You beat the true last boss, and then you beat the true last boss again. Then you get 4.6 million views on YouTube. When you're done entering your initials, you save the replay. This is important. Then you find a universal serial bus thing. You put the bus in your Xbox. You transfer the replay file onto the bus. And then you turn on your computer. You fire up Xenia and emulate Futari on Windows 10, obviously. You import the replay into the emulator, and then you open up Cheat Engine. You're playing the replay on the emulator. When you get to Stage 4, you pause the replay. You write down the math. Then you delete the math with Cheat Engine. Then you resume the replay and write down the math again. Then you add the two scores together. Then you have your world record. You may now put that on the internet. So like I said, very simple, just as Cave intended.
Wow. Thanks, Mark? Sorry, everyone. This is what happens when you hit the shooter crack pipe a bit too hard all at once. Mark is cramming for Shmup Slam 3 coming this weekend, and he may be a bit delirious. But in reality, Mark is right, and you can Google it. Futari does in fact have a counter stop bug, where your score stops counting right as you reach 4 million. And what Mark described is an actual cheat method that was devised to work around this bug and add up your scores at the end for a total. Apparently, the programmers at Cave thought nobody in their right mind would quit their job, stop showering, and eat cat food for a solid year to get good enough to play Ultra Mode and score that high. But never underestimate a raging shmup addiction. So while Mark may sound like the confessions of an unredeemed shmup addict, I actually learned something, and I hope you did too. Don't drink and shmup, folks, or play Futari on Ultra Mode. It's just not healthy. The next game is one that any fan of Cave will already know and love. A fabulously fun Dodonpachi style blast through urban destruction with a focus on fast gameplay and aggression. Ketsui, one of the most well-regarded games in the Cave library, it deserves its reputation. With its non-stop frantic action and brilliant bullet patterns that are almost as much fun to die on as they are to dodge. Almost. Ketsui is probably my third favorite Cave game, after Futari and Death Smiles. Its simple controls and non-stop frantic action are what I look for in a bullet hell shooter. If, like me, you're not a fan of slow-moving, dense patterns to dodge, but like the rush that comes from fast dodging and a rhythmic playstyle, Ketsui is the game for you. Like Dodonpachi, you have a weaker standard shot that lets you move at full speed, and a more powerful laser that slows down movement for more intricate dodging. And a bomb. That's it. Simple and effective. I personally always pick the faster moving ship as it suits my playstyle, the Purple Tank Hunter. And for what it's worth, in Ketsui, I find that holding down the auto fire at all times and simply pressing the laser when needed to cancel the auto shot is more effective than tapping and holding the same button. Ketsui gives you about 1.5 levels to get acquainted by starting out slow before it goes balls out and never lets up. Right here specifically, the very moment you kill this stage 2 mid-boss, the onslaught begins. Keep that trigger finger down, as within moments, the screen will flood with incoming waves and doesn't stop until you reach the boss. Get used to this pace, as it's what you'll see from start to finish of every stage until you reach the end, or your end, whichever comes first. What I enjoy about Ketsui is that the bullet patterns are so diverse and unusual, it's a lot of fun to find ways around them. At least on the first loop, they aren't so dense where you need to micro-dodge through them. You simply figure out their trajectories and they become a lot of fun to work around. And it's when the screen starts to fill with multiple large enemies, each firing off their own unique pattern, where things really get hairy. But what you're seeing here is actually quite doable for most of us, with some practice and a few playthroughs. I hadn't played Ketsui in years before this video, and within my second run, I was making it through on a continue or two. Unfortunately, the extras here aren't nearly as generous as some of the other ports, making it more difficult to practice and improve. There's no way to select a boss to practice that I know of, and the stage select only opens up after you've made it that far. So if you want to practice stage 4, you gotta make it there first on a regular game. So it's not as beginner friendly as ports like Futari 1.5. There is an Arrange X mode, with the biggest difference, at least that I noticed, being able to cancel certain bullets, as well as a different scoring system, but it's certainly not an easy mode, and only marginally more forgiving than the arcade, from what I noticed. So no matter which mode you play, you've got a solid challenge ahead of you. There's also a cool Arrange soundtrack, which some people may enjoy, more than the original. The final Stage 5 music in particular is a personal favorite. On the whole, I believe that Ketsui is considered tougher than Dodonpachi, but as usual, what you're watching me do is child's play compared to the main event, and that would be Ketsui Ura mode. A 2-all in Ketsui Ura, which Mark will explain, is considered one of the top 5 hardest achievements for any shmup in existence. And I'm not even sure if I'm saying that right, Ura or Yura, because honestly, I don't deserve it either way. Simply reaching Ura mode is no easy task, as it requires a no miss, no death, and no bombs run on the first loop, along with a score of over 120 million. You heard that right. If you can't even reach Ura mode, or pronounce it right, you're not ready for Ura mode. No shortcuts like when I simply selected Ultra mode in Futari. Getting to Ura will also allow you to reach the true last boss, something I've never, nor likely will ever achieve, as by the time I'm retired to have the time to get that good, my reflexes will be long gone to pull it off. Mark, on the other hand, is pretty accomplished in this game and even has a video up of his Ketsui 1-all run on his channel, The Electric Underground, along with tips and tricks on improving with shmups, and bullet hell in particular. Highly recommended. Take it away, Mark.
Your approach to this game can be described in one word: aggression. This is especially true in the Ura loop, where even in death, your enemies will continue to attack you. It's pretty metal. If you are a coward, if you insist on keeping your distance from your enemies and holding onto the back of the screen like a security blanket, you will be destroyed. You will be trapped and smothered by pink and blue. Ketsui is so hell-bent on punishing fear that it nerfs your focus shot from even reaching full screen. This insistence on aggression is the key problem that a lot of new players have when approaching Ketsui for the first time. Unlike other bullet hell games like Toho or Dodonpachi, Ketsui has little patience for long-range attacks and passive crowd control. This game keeps up a relentless wave of armored enemies who will continue attack from all directions. If you don't know how to point blank, if you don't understand how to bullet seal or how to misdirect close-range attacks, you will fail. As Junkie mentioned before, in order to reach the Ura loop in the first place, you need to complete a no-miss, no-bomb, high-scoring first loop requirement. I would just like to take a moment to emphasize how insane this requirement actually is. When it comes to a first loop clear, also called a 1-all, Ketsui is among the most difficult in Cave's library. Imagine you are an aspiring Ketsui player. You decided it's time for an Ura clear. You're eating your vegetables. In order to even try to beat one of the most difficult shmup loops around, you first need to complete a perfect survival clear of the original mode every time. Reset syndrome is a crippling condition. It's a condition that affects many talented shmup players out there, where they have to mindlessly replay the first few stages of a shmup due to small mistakes popping up here and there. Now imagine that your reset syndrome is 25 minutes long and you keep getting clipped by some sneaky bastard in stage 5 who's spawning right behind you. It's an exercise in madness. Not to mention the delightful bit of RNG in the second loop, where sometimes one of your precious extends will just fly away. There isn't a damn thing you can do about it. On the bright side, after you completely get crushed for hundreds of hours, you can take some solace in knowing that, comparatively speaking, Ketsui's final boss, Doom, is one of the easier Cave final bosses around, which I am sure is a big relief to everyone watching. Just imagine if Ketsui had 2 TLBs like Futari. That sounds fun. Also, one last note on Ketsui for the Xbox 360. Don't play it on the Xbox 360. You deserve better than that. You deserve to be happy. The 360 port runs slightly too fast and has fairly garbage training mode and extras. The port to play is definitely Ketsui Destiny for the PS4, which is basically superior in every way. I would say at this point that the 360's best use is probably as a frisbee for your dog who just wants to spend some quality time with you, but I can see some collectors' brains melting at the idea.
This next game was developed by Shinobu Yagawa, a former Rising in Cave, famous for his unique yet insanely difficult games. Battle Garega, armed police Batrider, and even ass kickers like Ibarra and the insane Rekka from the 8-bit days on Famicom. If you're picking up a Yagawa game, you know what you're getting into. I'm just gonna put him down. But this next game isn't so much famous as it is infamous, as it was so incredibly punishing and obtuse upon release that even expert players and Cave fans let him have it, forcing Cave to remake a newer version. Ultimately, it made its way to the Xbox 360 in a combo pack, Muchi Muchi Pork, and the game we're talking about, Pink Sweets. Yes, these are actual games, or in the case of Pink Sweets, not so much a game as a lesson in pain and humility. No special or hard modes needed here, even its base difficulty is ranked up there as one of the hardest games ever concocted. Pink Sweets is actually the sequel to Ibarra, another ass kicker of a game, but you'd be forgiven for not knowing, as it looks absolutely nothing like it. It shares mechanics with Yagawa's previous games, like the shield charge mechanic from Rekka. In general, Pink Sweets is a bullet hell that doesn't really feel like a bullet hell at all. You can tell by simply watching this footage that it doesn't play anything like Cave's typical fare. It's a combination of mechanics from various games that come together to form a cool but overly complex set of rules, making it a difficult game to initially get into. The chief mechanic it does nail is making you feel like a chump for even picking up the controller, and until you learn how the game wants you to play, there's no other game that'll make you feel like a complete and utter turd playing your very first shmup. It'll just continuously wreck your sorry ass until you figure out the right approach. According to Arcade Otaku, Shinobu Yagawa doesn't have a blood type, as his heart pumps the tears of defeated players. And once you play Pink Sweets on its original version, you'll know that euphemism isn't an exaggeration. It wasn't a rank system as much as a rank system, so steep and impenetrable that almost no player could manage to complete the game without an infinite amount of credits. Unlike most games with rank, in Pink Sweets it only goes up, meaning as you die, drop bombs, or any other normal means to decrease rank, nothing happens. It's like he intentionally designed the game to be the most impenetrable of his career, and like I mentioned earlier, folks complained, big time, as aside from a handful of truly insane level players, nobody could actually enjoy the game. So Cave released updated versions, which changed some of the gameplay, features, and the rank issues and allowed more players to actually partake in the bloodbath. My understanding is this game is not meant to be beaten on a single credit by anyone but the most elite of elite players, and even includes a so-called secret within the game that provides you with infinite credits. While it's beyond the scope of this video to get into, a quick search on the Shmups forum will yield you plenty of evening reading material, with folks arguing about whether it's a deliberate secret or a bug, along with the best ways and stages to trigger it. Don't ask me, as I'll never be playing that original insane version of the arcade anyway. But from my experience, it's really a pain in the ass. You have your main weapon, which fires when you aren't charging your shield, and you have your rose hips that fire alternately by holding down the other button. Tapping the button repositions them into various formations, and that's just the main ship, as there are many others, each with their own unique weapons and options. All I can tell you is that the game is manageable when you're fully powered up, but once you die and don't have at least 2, if not 3 rose hips, the game will just start wrecking you endlessly, either until you credit feed your way through until some power-ups, or realize you aren't really playing as much as you're watching yourself die, and reset the game. It's clear that the original mode isn't so much a game as it is a torture chamber designed to brutalize anyone willing to give it a credit. For my part, I wanted to quickly show you the cool arrange mode created for this release, as it's likely the one 99.99% of us will be playing. It completely changes most of the mechanics of the original game, almost to the point where it's a unique game in of itself. Your main shot and rose hips now fire together as one, without any odd management. And your charge mechanic remains, only a bit slower to recharge, to offset your much greater firepower. Simply not holding the button charges up your shield, which is then used to block most forms of enemy projectiles. As you probably noticed, in Pink Suites it's not about dodging everything on screen, but absorbing smaller Type 1 bullets, while dodging the larger unblockable attacks. Pressing the charge button will release your special attack, which blocks every type of enemy projectile, and provides you cover while it's active. This forms the key mechanic of the game, as it's your super weapon to constantly be charged up and used at the right moments, with proper timing, to shield yourself from unblockable volleys. Dropping it at the right times is the key to survival. I personally found the initial stages of Arrange mode far too easy, especially after playing the ridiculous arcade mode, almost to the point of them being a bit boring to play. But the later stages fix this. My two favorites are the brilliant stage 5 and 6. You find yourself blasting past giant connected, train-like mini-bosses, unloading on you from every direction with both blockable shots and powerful lasers, requiring careful timing of your charge bombs to block incoming beams. It's a rush of a level, and one that I enjoyed replaying again in the training mode to improve, so I could run through it without death. Stage 6 takes that rush to the next level, with enemies flying in from all directions, including behind you, nullifying your front shield, and requiring some memorization to know where the next wave will come from. It's an onslaught of wave after wave of kamikaze enemies, and my favorite stage of the game. It'll catch you with your pants down over and over again, but once you figure it out, it's a hell of a good time to fly through. You can see the brilliance of Yagawa's design shine through in stages like this, and it's only playing on Arrange mode that many will get to experience it, as on the original mode, stage 6 is where I pretty much threw in the towel for the evening, as once you die on the stage, it becomes an affair of credit feeding and watching yourself explode over and over. I can see how perfecting it would eventually be an absolute rush, but the amount of time investment simply boggles the mind. Yagawa truly was a sadistic bastard. Unlike Futari, this Xbox port doesn't have an updated HD version, so the graphics are definitely a bit dated in that regard. But don't let that one negative sway you, as the music in the game is well done, and once you get through the easy initial stages, the Arrange mode is a lot of fun to play. And speaking of music, this is some good upbeat stuff that sounds straight out of Alvin and the Chipmunks meets the Caterpillar from Alice in Wonderland. The music matches the visuals, like you passed out in a vintage toy shop after loading up on mushrooms, having fever dreams of everything coming to life, and start dancing around you. But we're not here to talk about the fun but fair mode of Pink Suites, right? Which you should try and play one day. No, this is the top 5 most brutal Shmup series, and the mechanics of the true, original mode are deep, unique, and deserve proper explanation. So again, Mark from Electric Underground is going to show us scrubs, and that includes scrubs like me, what it means to truly play Pink Suites, the way it was designed by Yagawa.
Ah, yes, Pink Suites. Everyone loves Pink Suites. To be 100 with you all, I have very little experience or expertise with Pink Suites, as I've hardly played the game outside of some credit feeding where I was crushed into pixie powder. The good news though is that 2 of my homies, Plasmo and Pearl, are extremely talented at the game. Plasmo actually holds the world record for Pink Suites over even the Japanese, which is absolutely crazy. And Pearl was kind enough to hook me up with the awesome footage you are seeing right now. According to Plasmo and Pearl, while the arcade version of Pink Suites is definitely challenging, the 360 port is significantly harder due to it being broken and basically incomplete. As far as Plasmo knows, only 3 people have cleared the 360 port of Pink Suites: himself, EGI, and Gray. Here are some of the ridiculous changes that were made to the 360 port. 1. The infinite life glitch has been removed. You could say that makes sense, if you're one of those people. 2. The rank in the port is completely broken. it increases far too quickly to the point where the player cannot do anything to stop it or minimize it. According to Plasmo, by the time he hits stage 5, the game is throwing literally impossible patterns at him. Stages 6 and 7 are even worse. 3. The game is really strict with its extends as well, which is just delightful on top of everything else that is going on. And then, just to really spit in the player's eye, in the 360 version, your shot power resets whenever you die, making recovery from mistakes a horrible case of Gradius syndrome. And lastly, according to my testing, the 360 version of Pink Sweets has some pretty serious input lag. The average 360 game, especially the cave ports, is around 3 frames of lag, which is pretty solid honestly. But Pink Sweets runs at a whopping 5 frames of lag, which is like playing with pudding spilled all over your controller. One small glimmer of hope though is that I have not yet tested the game's performance at 480p, which might help the input lag at least a little bit. Yes, I know it sounds like some kind of schoolyard gossip, but I am telling you that I found that a lot of 360 ports do benefit from being played at 480p rather than 720p or 1080p. As to why that is, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm guessing it has something to do with VSync and frame rate. That's my guess anyway.
Thanks, Mark. At least now I don't feel so bad about Pink Sweets wrecking me on stage 6 the other day. Now I can blame it on the broken port. Just a quick note, the reason Pearl's gameplay looks so insane here is the rank. It's not a harder mode, but simply playing better and not dying for a long time, which results in the game doing this. So as you can imagine, it's one brutal game to play, likely just how Yagawa intended it. For my final pick, you're gonna see a real beast of a game, Dodonpachi DaiOuJou. Its original white label 2-all is considered the rarest and most difficult to achieve in the history of shmups. And its port for the PS2 is absolutely amazing, which is why I own this copy here. It's got all the extras, modes, features, simulations, trainings that you'd expect from a lovingly crafted product. And then you have the Xbox port, so lazy and bare bones that simply trying to practice and improve at the game is an exercise in frustration, easily making this game one of the hardest in existence, but also making the port one of the most brutally frustrating to play. Unfortunately, I still had to. So what do you get when you combine an already brutally hard game with a port that makes you slave away for every bit of progress? A release that pretty much only caters to the hardest of the hardcore crowd. Does it have an alternate or a range mode like the other games I talked about? Nope. Does it have a decent practice mode where you can start a stage with a chosen power level, at a boss, or with any other options to help hone your skills? Nope. Okay, fine. Does it let you play the main mode with a handful of credits, so you can try to play the game for survival and learn some of the later stages? Nope. Well, what does it give you then? A loading screen. An agonizingly long loading screen when starting the game or switching between modes. That's almost as difficult to sit through as it is to get anywhere in the game itself. What you do get are 2 modes to choose from. The original arcade version called the White Label, and the new version, Black Label, with fixes and adjustments that Cave wanted to implement. And that's pretty much it, literally. Oh wait, you do get some poorly designed, clunky menus that looked like they were coded in Visual Basic and only serve to irritate you every time you want to retry a stage. The training mode here isn't even serviceable, as no matter which stage you start on, you can't choose an average power level for your ship. Unless you're already an expert, how far do you think you'll get starting on stage 4 or 5 with a level 1 pea shooter? Not very far. It feels like an exercise in futility and isn't particularly good practice. Fine, I'll play normal mode. It's gotta give you a couple credits, right? Nope, you get 0 credits. Okay, one. The only one, as if you were in the arcade and were trying to 1cc the game. Apparently, the developers figured that anyone that bought this was already a master in the arcade, so they can already 1cc it. Credits? Who needs those? Oh yeah, go ahead and play the game over and over. I think for every half hour you put into it, they throw a bone your way, and a credit. Thanks for nothing. Oh wait, the silver lining. There actually is an easier arranged version that they did include called X Mode for beginners, but it's nowhere to be found. Since I only own the PS2 version, I tried to look up how to find it because it wasn't in the menus, and guess what? It only opens up after 6 hours of play. What numbskull decided to hide their entry-level arrange mode behind 6 hours of brutality simply to unlock? What novice player would even know to put up with 6 hours of being kicked directly in the nuts before unlocking a mode that they can actually play? Whoever came up with that idea needs to be dragged out in the street and curb stomped. So the overall package is piss poor, making a brutal game even more impenetrable to almost anyone that would pick it up, which is a shame, as the game itself, of course, is typically brilliant cave. It's definitely got the old school flair, and learning the best routes for every stage is the name of the game. The first 2 levels actually aren't that bad, and any experienced player will fly through them after a try or two. But starting on stage 3, things get serious, and knowing a good route through is the difference between it being manageable and completely overwhelming. It's a hell of a lot of fun, but good luck practicing it very easily, as if you're playing on the Xbox, you'll be starting over from stage 1 every time to get there, and it only gets harder from there. A decent practice mode that at least lets you choose a starting power level to fit the stage would have gone a long way to making it more manageable, but as it stands, the lack thereof is a big part of what makes this package such a ball buster. Now, I have to admit that stage 4 is my absolute favorite. During one of my many ill-advised training runs, starting with nothing but a crappy weapon, I somehow managed to find a route for the first part of the stage that was absolutely magic. Even with a crap weapon to start, getting the route just right was like floating on a cloud, being at the exact right place on the screen for the duration, flowing back and forth, and watching the masses of bullets harmlessly pass by. This first section was then followed by an incredibly cool onslaught of tanks that, when you get timed just right, are an absolute blast to plow through. I'll admit, I'm a novice at this game, and I'm not sure how I managed to squeeze through some of this incoming fire, but it was bliss doing it. By this point, my bombs were exhausted, and all I could do was unload a last hyper and see how far into the stage I would get before I got sent packing. And I think this stage has my favorite music to complement the insanity unfolding around you. As a game, DOJ is great and recommended, and I'm going to leave it to Mark to really tell you about that. But in this day and age, I'd recommend getting this on an emulator and practicing that way. Save states and get good first. Then pick up this version and have at it. Or much better yet, grab the far superior PS2 version and get the best experience you can have on a console. Trying to learn a game this hard on a port this lazy is like pulling teeth with a rusty pair of pliers. But don't leave it to me as the final impression of an outstanding game with a lazy port, as we're here to see some of the hardest, most brutal gameplay ever conceived, and the white label of this game is as hard as they come. So as always, I'll turn it over to Mark to show us how it's done and give us the inside scoop on what makes DOJ, and especially the second loop, one of the hardest in existence.
Dodonpachi DaiOuJou is widely considered a strong candidate for the greatest shmup ever made. What makes this question a little bit complicated, though, is remembering to specify which version of DOJ is being discussed. For those who don't know, DOJ actually has two variants, White Label and Black Label. White Label, the version we have selected for this video, is the original release and the more difficult version. The key differences between the two is that White Label gives the player less hypers, has brutal rank buildup, and does not forgive you when you die. This means that once you piss off White Label by firing off a bunch of panic hypers, it will not stop punishing you until your credit is devoured. The other key difference is how lives are handled between the loops. In Black Label, Cave returned to a normal system of life management, where your extends merely transfer from loop to loop. In White Label, Cave decided it would get expert players off the cabinet as fast as possible by cashing out all your remaining extends. Then, when you enter the second loop, no matter how well you did in the first loop, you only have one extend. You then have to gain extends by not bombing or not dying more than once per stage. This is sort of a weird inversion of how Ketsui or a loop works. As Junkie said, there is no doubt that the PS2 port of DOJ is far superior to the 360 port. This is because Eureka knew what they were doing when they created the PS2 port, and 5PB, the team behind the 360 port, just tried to copy and paste the PS2's code into the 360. This is why the game has massive load times and all that. However, one flaw that the PS2 version has, which isn't technically a flaw, is that it does not actually include the Black Label version, only White Label. So for the purposes of this video, the PS2 version is the way to go. If you want to play Black Label though, then you would have to emulate on Shmup or MAME, or use the Hopefully someday M2 will come around to creating a proper Black Label port. Along with the arcade mode, the PS2 port of White Label also had another intriguing addition, Death Label. Death Label is an insane boss rush mode that actually displays a warning screen when you select it. Death Label is so difficult that it took 7 years and 5 months for a player to finally clear it. That player was MON, and the replay is an essential watch. So when you add together the crazy difficulty of the arcade mode to all, plus the madness that is Death Label, it is easy to see why the PS2 version is so difficult. Unfortunately though, Death Label was not included in the Xbox 360 port. If you ask me, this is a really disappointing decision, especially since they were already copying pasting the PS2 version anyway. X mode is a fun inclusion, but the further you get, the more you realize how silly and broken it actually is.
After all that brutality, it may be time for a diaper change, so I'm gonna wrap it up quick. I want to thank Mark from the Electric Underground for collaborating with me on this awesome episode, and I look forward to collaborating with him on future projects. I also want to give a huge shout out to both Pearl and SMC for contributing some killer gameplay on Pink Sweets and Futari Ultra. I put a link to everyone's channel in my description and my top comment, so check them out. I also wanted to mention that Shmup Slam 3, a big streaming event, is going on right now this weekend, put on by Mark himself. If you've not heard of it yet, definitely check it out and see what you think. If anything, to see some amazing gameplay and maybe pick up some tips and tricks on some of your favorite games. But the purpose of events like this is to slowly bring Shmups back into the mainstream competitive scene, or at least try, so it can't succeed without our support. Finally, if you enjoyed this video, I've got plenty more of the brutal Shmup series that I've already done, from the Mega Drive to the Neo Geo, the Saturn, the PC Engine, and you can check a bunch of them out right here. And I've got plenty more really cool videos still in the works. Until then, smoke them if you got them. But be careful, because with some of these games, they might just smoke you instead. And if you have the means, TATE that bitch!